Greetings, Remnant Church and online friends. Welcome to the Midweek Refuel, where we seek out the ancient wisdom because we have to. Modern wisdom has jumped the shark, removed the if, broken the glass, and is blaming the palace for it. Last time, Chesterton told us how the if is the most dangerous word modern man has tried to delete. The quiet if, the quiet conditional statement, the condition that holds joy itself together in the one thing we keep removing while insisting we're still free. Modern man tends to find the if too restrictive, not because the if is cruel, but because the if is conditional. And modern man does not want conditions. Oh no, modern man wants permission for everything, with no consequences, no conditions, no anything. He does not want joy that must be guarded. He only wants joy that can be felt in the moment. He does not want a palace that can be lost. He wants a playground that never closes its doors. But the if reminds him of something. It reminds him of something modern wisdom can no longer tolerate. That joy is not a right unto thee. It is a gift unto thee. And gifts imply gratitude, and gratitude implies humility, and we got a long way to go, don't we? Chesterton's problem with removing the if is not moralistic. I think when you hear it, you will realize, like I did, it is not moralistic, it is structural. Remove the if, and like a Jenga game, you don't get freedom, you get collapse. And collapse is exactly where we are living now. When a culture deletes the if, it does not become generous. It becomes incoherent. The conditions that once preserved meaning are now mistaken for oppression. And the structures that once protected joy itself are now treated as obstacles to self-expression. What follows is not liberation. What follows is fragmentation, systems continuing to operate long after the logic that sustained them has been removed. Sex without the if is the most obvious example to me. When intimacy is severed from covenant, from permanence, from consequences, it does not become more humane. It becomes thinner, it becomes worthless. It becomes something vile, actually. Desire remains. Trust erodes. Access increases. Meaning goes away, decays. What was once an act, a holy act that bound two people into a shared future, becomes an experience consumed in isolation. Chesterton's fairy tale logic proves exact, doesn't it? Remove the condition, and love just flies away, not because it was forbidden, but because it was no longer guarded. The same collapse appears in our language, doesn't it? Speech once assumed an if, words mattered, if they corresponded to reality. When the condition is removed, expression replaces truth, and communication gives way to subjective performance. Disagreement becomes violence to people who think this way. Definitions become negotiable, and silence to the rest of us begins to feel safer than anything else. Language does not fail because it is constrained. It fails because it is no longer tethered to anything, especially reality. Identity follows this same exact pattern. A self once was received. It was rooted in givenness. It was rooted in history. It was rooted in biology, and it was rooted in obligation to others. Now it floats free of any condition beyond assertion. But a self without conditions cannot endure contradiction. It must be constantly defended, constantly reaffirmed, constantly reinforced. It's exhausting. I think we're actually having some woke fatigue in this country. It is very exhausting. What presents itself as self-creation, reveals itself as fragility. A self without limits has no edges, and what has no edges cannot hold anything. Authority as well collapses when its if is removed from it. Leadership once required submission. submission to something higher than itself, something higher than the leader, to truth, to law, to God. When authority becomes unconditional, legitimacy evaporates. Power remains. Oh, yes, it does. But trust dissolves. Institutions hollow out, not because people reject authority. They hollow out because authority no longer submits to anything beyond itself. Even freedom erodes. Freedom was never the absence of all constraint. That's a child's thought. It was the ability to choose meaningfully within reality. That's adult thought. When every condition is treated as an enemy, choice becomes paralyzing. Commitment feels dangerous and permanence feels oppressive. Options multiply, but directions disappear. What remains is anxiety disguised as autonomy. This is not accidental. This was done to you on purpose. It is the predictable result of deleting if. Chesterton understood this long before the collapse became visible to us. What he described through fairy tales and moral imagination was not nostalgia or whimsy. It was structural insight into reality. He saw that joy is not sustained by our permission. It is sustained by our obedience, not by limitlessness, but by proper proportion. The palace does not fall because the rule was cruel. It falls because the rule was broken. And standing amid the ruins of this castle, modern man insists he is still free. Well, because he has forgotten that freedom was never the absence of conditions. Freedom was the faithful keeping of them. And Chesterton's brilliance here is not merely that he names the danger, but that he trains all of us to see it everywhere at once. Fairy tales do not offer abstract rules. They offer conditions. Again and again and again, joy is given to the person in the story, and it's given to them lavishly. It's given to them irrationally, but always with an if. You may live in the palace if you do not open the door. You may keep the kingdom if you do not forget the word. You may love forever if you do not light the lamp. You may remain enchanted if you do not pluck the flower. You may dance until dawn if you return before midnight. You may wear the glass slipper if you do not break it. Each story repeats the same grammar. The condition is rarely explained to us, and the gift is never earned by us, and the rule is always small. The consequence, though, is catastrophic. And the catastrophe does not feel punitive. It feels structural, as though something essential has been violated and reality itself has come undone. Chesterton's point is not that fairy tales are moralistic. It is that they are honest. They tell children the truth that modern adults refuse to hear or even speak. Happiness is real, but it is guarded. Joy is possible, but it is conditional. And the condition is often mysterious because the gift itself is mysterious. And once you see this pattern in fairyland, you cannot unsee it in the real world. You may have love if you keep faith. You may have trust if you tell the truth. You may have all the freedom you want if you accept responsibility. You may have intimacy if you accept permanence. You may have meaning if you accept limits. You may have joy if you do not treat it as a right. The list lengthens. I could go on because the structure here is universal. The framework is wheels within wheels. What fairy tales teach symbolically, life enforces concretely. The same if that holds enchantment together, that same if holds civilization itself together. Remove it, and the story does not become freer. It becomes much, much, much shorter. And at the end of this long trail of conditions, Chesterton allows the reader to finally arrive, almost without noticing, at the first and greatest if of all. You may have the garden. You may walk with God. You may eat freely of every tree. If you don't eat that one, the apple in the garden is not an anomaly. It is the archetype of all. All fairy tale catastrophes echo it. All collapsed joys repeat it. Eden was not lost because knowledge was evil or because curiosity was sinful. Eden was lost because a condition was violated, because the if was treated as negotiable. Chesterton saw this clearly, clearer than we do today. We're the frog in the vat, aren't we? The modern world has not disproven him. It has confirmed and reinforced him. We did not outgrow the fairy tales. We reenacted them, only this time without believing them, and therefore without heeding them. The woke movement, with its feverish insistence on dismantling structures, redefining truth, and collapsing boundaries, is not a new phenomenon. It is an echo of the same logic that Chesterton warned us against. It is a modern fairy tale in which the if has been excised, not through accident, but through design. The woke left, in its relentless pursuit of deconstruction, seeks to erase conditions, all of them, not as a philosophical exercise, but as a cultural imperative. And like the ancient serpent of old in that garden so many years ago, it whispers still, you may do this, and you may do that, and you may not do this, but only if you believe me. But here's the twist. The woke movement does not merely reject conditions. It replaces them with its own arbitrary ones, which are no less conditional than the ones they claim to dismantle. The result is a culture of paradoxical freedom where the absence of if becomes the very condition that binds us. The woke movement's war on conditions is not born of nihilism, it is born of ideological ambition. It seeks to replace the old structures. It seeks to replace family, tradition, and objective truth with new ones, rooted in performative identity and radical relativism. The if is their first casualty because it represents the grammar of the real. The idea that certain actions have certain consequences, that truths are not merely asserted, truths are discovered, that relationships require mutual accountability. To remove the if is to eliminate the scaffolding of meaning itself. For example, you may speak your truth if you are marginalized. Here the if becomes a gatekeeper, doesn't it? But one that privileges identity over evidence. The condition is not whether the statement is true. It's about who says it. Another example, you may critique power structures if you do so through the lens of intersectionality. Again, the if is not about justice or about truth. It's about ideological conformity. You may love your neighbor if you first deconstruct your privilege. The condition becomes a performative ritual rather than a moral imperative. The woke movement's if is not a boundary. It's a boundary check, a way to enforce its own orthodoxy under the guise of liberation. It is the same logic that once said, you may be free if you submit to the revolution. But in doing so, they have not abolished conditions. They have merely replaced them with new ones, more insidious, because they are framed as anti-conditions. The cost of this replacement is already visible. One, truth in language. The woke movement's rejection of objective truth under the banner of context or power dynamics removes the condition that words need conform to reality. A statement is no longer judged by its fidelity to the facts. It's rather judged by who says it. This leads to a culture where language becomes a weapon, not a bridge. Words are no longer tools for understanding each other, but rather instruments to control each other. And the result? Disagreement is framed as violence by these people, and silence is the only safe option for the sane. 2, relationships and accountability. In the absence of conditions, relationships become transactional or performative. Love, once rooted in commitment and mutual sacrifice, becomes a series of gestures, pronouns, hashtags, performance metrics. Did you text me within 24 hours? The if that once bound people to each other, I will love you if I am faithful, I will trust you if I am honest, is replaced by the hollow promise of, I will love you if you validate me. The result is a culture of fragility where relationships are sustained not by covenant, but by constant affirmation. That's got to get old, doesn't it? 3, the moral clarity and purpose. Without conditionals, without conditions, morality becomes arbitrary, whatever you want. The woke movement's insistence on intersectional justice often just dissolves into a relativism that condemns all systems but doesn't offer an alternative. When every rule is oppressive, the only path forward is to dismantle everything, I guess, leaving behind not liberation, leaving behind confusion. This is the logic of the modern anti-structure, where the absence of conditions becomes its own form of control. If we continue down this dark and ugly road, the consequences will be catastrophic for all of us. The woke movement's war on the if does not lead to utopia. It leads to void and destruction and chaos. Without conditions, there is no foundation for truth, there is no anchor for your relationships, and there is no direction for purpose. We become like the characters in a fairy tale who have been told they are free, only to realize that freedom without limits is a prison of their own making. The collapse will not come all at once. It will come quietly and then everywhere. As conditions are removed, communities will begin to fracture, not into freedom, but into more factions. Truth will no longer be discovered together. It will be negotiated apart. Coherence will be traded for inclusivity, and unity will be redefined as agreement, enforced by silence. And morality will not disappear, but it will hollow out. Without the if, virtue becomes performance and goodness becomes branding. We will no longer know what it means to be just. We will no longer know what it means to be honest. We will no longer know what it means to be loving, only what it means to display the correct signals at the correct time. And beneath it all will be a deeper loss, spiritual emptiness. The if is not merely a cultural tool. It is the grammar of covenant itself. It is the structure by which human beings relate to God and to one another. Remove it, and we do not merely lose order, we lose the language of grace. To reclaim the if, then, is not to retreat into nostalgia, but to return to reality. Truth, love, and freedom are not self-created. They are given to us. Christianity is unapologetically conditional, every inch of that book. You may have life if you repent, but this is not a cage. It is the shape of mercy. The if is not an obstacle to freedom. It is the boundary that marks what is sacred and therefore what is worth guarding. In an age determined to erase all conditions, the real question becomes this: what if we stopped treating truth as a commodity to be redefined and instead restored it as a gift? What if we replaced performative identity with the humility of covenant? What if we reclaimed the if, not as a restriction, but as the language of love itself? The answer is not in more chaos, but in the return to the conditions that have sustained us for millennia. The if is not the enemy of freedom. It is the foundation of freedom. To remove it is to destroy the entire palace and then wonder why you're homeless. At this point, we're going to read straight from the source, Chesterton's own words, no paraphrases, no commentary. And while you're turning there, let me ask you to do something practical for me. If you find this kind of teaching valuable, hit the like and subscribe buttons. That's not flattery and it's not marketing. It simply tells the algorithms that are out there that this is worth putting in front of someone else. Truth still travels by human choice and by human voice, but right now, it also travels by code through barbed wire algorithms, and this helps it get to where it needs to go. It is a dreadful thing to say that Mr. W.B. Yeats does not understand fairyland, but I do say it. He is an ironical Irishman full of intellectual reactions. He is not stupid enough to understand fairyland. Fairies prefer people of the yokel type like myself, people who gape and grin and do as they are told. Mr. Yeats reads into Elfland all the righteous insurrection of his own race. But the lawlessness of Ireland is a Christian lawlessness, founded on reason and justice. The Fenian is rebelling against something he understands only too well, but the true citizen of fairyland is obeying something that he does not understand at all. In the fairy tale, an incomprehensible happiness rests upon an incomprehensible condition. A box is opened, and all evils fly out. A word is forgotten, and cities perish. A lamp is lit, and love flies away. A flower is plucked, and human lives are forfeited. An apple is eaten, and the hope of God is gone. This is the tone of fairy tales, and it is certainly not lawlessness or even liberty, though men under a mean modern tyranny may think it liberty by comparison. People out of Portland jail might think Fleet Street free, but closer study will prove that both fairies and journalists are the slaves of duty. Fairy godmothers seem at least as strict as other godmothers. Cinderella received a coach out of Wonderland and a coachman out of nowhere, but she received a command, which might have come out of Brixton, that she should be back by 12. Also, she had a glass slipper, and it cannot be a coincidence that glass is so common a substance in folklore. This princess lives in a glass castle, that princess on a glass hill. This one sees all things in a mirror. They may all live in glass houses if they will not throw stones for this thin glitter of glass. Everywhere is the expression of the fact that the happiness is bright, but brittle, like the substance most easily smashed by a housemaid or a cat. And this fairy tale sentiment also sank into me and became my sentiment towards the whole world. I felt and feel that life itself is as bright as the diamond, but as brittle as a window pane. And when the heavens were compared to the terrible crystal, I can remember a shudder. I was afraid that God would drop the cosmos with a crash. Remember, however, that to be breakable is not the same as to be perishable. Strike a glass and it will not endure an instant. Simply do not strike it, and it will endure 1,000 years. Such, it seemed, was the joy of man, either in Elfland or on earth. The happiness depended on not doing something, which you could at any moment do, and which very often it was not obvious why you should not do. Now, the point here is that to me, this did not seem unjust. If the miller's third son said to the fairy, "Explain why I must not stand on my head in the fairy palace," the other might fairly reply, "Well, if it comes to that, explain the fairy palace." If Cinderella says, "How is it that I must leave the ball at 12?" her grandmother might answer, "How is it that you are going there till 12? If I leave a man in my will 10 talking elephants and 100 winged horses, he cannot complain if the conditions partake of the slight eccentricity of the gift. He must not look a winged horse in the mouth. And it seems to me that existence itself so very eccentric a legacy that I could not complain of not understanding the limitations of the vision, which I did not understand the vision they limited. The frame, was no stranger than the picture. The veto might well be as wild as the vision. It might be as startling as the sun, as elusive as the waters, as fantastic and terrible as the towering trees. For this reason, we may call it the fairy godmother philosophy. I never could join the young men of my time in feeling what they call the general sentiment of revolt. I should have resisted, let us hope, any rules that were evil, and with those and their definitions I shall deal in another chapter, but I did not feel disposed to resist any rule merely because it was mysterious. Estates are sometimes held by foolish forms, the breaking of a stick, or the payment of a peppercorn. I was willing to hold the huge estate of earth and heaven by any such futile fantasy. It could not well be wilder that the fact that I was allowed to hold it at all. At this stage, I give only one ethical instance to show my meaning. I could never mix in the common murmur of that rising generation against monogamy because no restriction on sex seemed so odd and unexpected as sex itself. To be allowed, like Endymion, to make love to the moon, and then to complain that Jupiter kept his own moon in a harem, seemed to me, bred on fairy tales like Endymion's, a vulgar anticlimax. Keeping to one woman is a small price for so much as seeing one woman. To complain that I could only be married once was like complaining that I had only been born once. It was incommensurate with the terrible excitement of which one was talking. It showed not an exaggerated sensibility to sex, but a curious insensibility to it. A man is a fool who complains that he cannot enter Eden by 5 gates at once. Polygamy is a lack of the realization of sex. It is like a man plucking 5 pears in mere absence of mind. The aesthetes touch the last insane limits of language in their eulogy on lovely things. The thistledown made them weep. A burnished beetle brought them to their knees. Yet their emotion never impressed me for an instant, for this reason, that it never occurred to them to pay for their pleasure in any sort of symbolic sacrifice. Men, I felt, might fast 40 days for the sake of hearing a blackbird sing. Men might go through fire to find a cowslip. Yet these lovers of beauty could not even keep sober for the blackbird. They would not go through common Christian marriage by way of recompense to the cowslip. Surely one might pay for extraordinary joy in ordinary morals. Oscar Wilde said that sunsets were not valuable because we could not pay for sunsets. But Oscar Wilde was wrong. We can pay for sunsets. We can pay for them by not being Oscar Wilde. Let us say it plainly now, without flinching. What has been taken from us is not small. And what makes it worse is this: much of it was not stolen. Much of it was traded. We traded permanence for fleeting pleasures. We traded truth for expression, covenant for convenience, inheritance for immediacy. Like Esau, we sold our birthright, not for gold, not for silver, not for even survival, for soup, for something warm, quick, and temporary. We were hungry, and we were impatient, and we told ourselves that tomorrow would take care of itself. And now we live in that aftermath. We live in a world stripped of meaning, where words slip through our fingers, where love evaporates the moment it costs us something, where children inherit confusion instead of the clarity they deserve, and freedom feels more like panic than promise. We were told we were throwing off chains, and instead we threw away the keys. And here is the part that should make us angry. We were heirs. We were not beggars. We were not slaves. We were sons. The ifs we despised were not restrictions. They were the markers of inheritance. They were the signs that the house was ours, that the land was ours, that the name was ours. And we gave them away because we were tired of guarding them. But the story does not end in the far country, thank God, because the Father we have is not petty. He is not transactional. He is not waiting with crossed arms to say, I told you so. He is watching the road. And when his sons ragged, angry, ashamed, and starving, finally come to themselves, he does not demand an explanation. He does not negotiate terms. He does not ask them to earn their way back into what they never deserved in the first place. He runs, he restores the robe, he puts the ring back on the finger, he kills the fatted calf, and he gives us our ifs back. Not as punishment, but as proof that we are still sons of the house. You may have truth if you receive it. You may have freedom if you submit to what is real. You may have joy if you stop demanding it and start guarding it. You may have the kingdom if you will come home. This is not cruelty. This is mercy. This is what love looks like in a world that has proven it cannot survive without limits. The world told us that obedience was slavery. Christ tells us obedience is the doorway back to the house. The world crowned chaos king. Christ offers us a kingdom back. So let the anger do its righteous work. Let it wake us up. Let it drive us home. And yet, this is not the end of the story. For when the if is restored, when the small commands are kept again, when the old words mean what they say, and the truth is welcomed home again, then the music does not die, it comes back. The wise remember how to speak. The fathers remember who they are. The lights come back on in the hall, and the kingdom remembers its name. Because the throne is not empty, the palace still stands, the king still reigns on high. As ambassador of the kingdom of light, as one sent ahead of the procession, I bring you news from the king. If you will come home, if you will keep the small commands, if you will lay down the lies that you must rule yourself, if you will bend the knee where the crown already rests, the glass is made whole, the gate stands wide open, the robe is placed back on your shoulders, and the music of the kingdom begins again. Christ is king. Hail to the King.